The hall was vast, shining with crystal chandeliers and walls that seemed to hum with quiet power. It was the day of the ceremony, the day when Omegas of the realm were presented to society. Bright silks and polished floors reflected the anxious faces of noble families, each Omega walking with a mixture of pride and fear. Among them, one girl moved quietly, almost invisible. She was different. Her hair, dark as midnight, framed a pale face that seemed too small for the weight of the whispers she carried. "Look at her," one noblewoman whispered to another. "She carries the mark." The mark. That simple word carried more weight than any crown or title. In their society, a mark could mean power, yes, but often it meant danger. Those who bore it were treated with caution, suspicion, or outright disdain. And today, the Omega who carried it walked alone, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly. Her name was Lyra. Ever since she had been a child, she had been called cursed. People avoided her. Children whispered behind her back. Adults averted their eyes, and even teachers hesitated to praise her when she excelled. The mark on her wrist, faint, silver blue, shaped like a small crescent, was said to bring misfortune to anyone who drew close. Many didn't know the truth. It was not a curse, but a signal of an unusual ability she could not yet control. Lyra's steps were measured. She had practiced them countless times in the small mirror of her room. Her nerves hummed like the strings of a harp. The whispers grew louder as she neared the center of the hall. Nobles in fine robes and jeweled accessories turned their eyes toward her, some with curiosity, some with thinly veiled disgust. "Why does she even come here?" one young lord murmured, his voice carrying easily through the hall. Lyra kept her face neutral, though her chest tightened. She was used to this, yet the sting never dulled. She could feel the tension, like invisible fingers tracing her spine. Every step felt heavier than the last. Then the music began, a soft, enchanting tune played by unseen instruments, filling the hall with a rhythm that made hearts beat faster. The ceremony was starting. One by one, Omegas were introduced. Some were celebrated for their grace, others for their family status. And all the while, Lyra remained in the shadows, waiting for her turn. When her name was called, a hush fell over the hall. She stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. For a moment, she felt as if the entire world had stopped. Eyes followed her, measuring her every move. She noticed a few sympathetic faces among the crowd, but most were filled with doubt or silent judgment. Lyra took her place at the center, standing tall despite the fear knotting her stomach. The mark on her wrist gleamed faintly in the light. Some gasped, others muttered quietly to each other. She had expected this. She had been preparing for this day all her life, yet she hadn't prepared for the emptiness that came from realizing how few truly saw her. And then, a voice. Deep, strong, commanding. A presence that made the whispers pause. The Alpha King entered. His robes were dark, trimmed with silver and gold, and he carried himself with an effortless authority. The hall seemed smaller as he moved, all eyes drawn to him. Lyra felt a strange pull in her chest, not fear but curiosity. He didn't look at the mark with disgust or fear. He looked intrigued. He stopped a few steps from her, his gaze unwavering. The murmurs of nobles around them rose like wind against the walls of a silent forest. "Step forward, Omega," the king said, his voice carrying across the hall. Lyra froze for a heartbeat. Every eye was on her. She had practiced her response, her movements, her bow, but now, with the king watching, every calculation seemed small and insufficient. She stepped forward anyway, placing one foot in front of the other, feeling the warmth of courage growing quietly in her chest. The king studied her carefully. He walked slowly, circling her as if weighing her presence, her strength, and her spirit. Lyra held her breath, unsure whether she was about to be praised or dismissed. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, almost as if sensing the attention of someone who understood it. "Cursed," one noble whispered behind her, voice sharp. "She is cursed." The king turned, and his eyes met the whisperer's. For a moment, the hall fell silent again. The king's gaze was firm, steady, unyielding. He then returned his attention to Lyra. "You are not cursed," he said, his voice carrying a calm authority. "You are marked. And there is a difference." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. No one had heard the king speak in this way before. Usually the ceremony was filled with judgment, with whispers that cut deeper than knives. Yet, here in this moment the king was different. Lyra felt a strange warmth bloom inside her chest. She had never heard kindness spoken about her mark, nor understanding, nor recognition. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice felt caught in her throat. The king stepped closer. "The mark signifies potential," he continued. "It is not a curse. It is a gift, waiting to be understood, and gifts should never be ignored." Gasps echoed in the hall. Nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered hurriedly, their schemes disrupted by a king who defied tradition. Others looked at Lyra with curiosity, some even hope. Lyra's heart raced. For the first time she felt seen. Really seen. She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. The weight of years of whispers, of avoidance, of silent suffering, felt lighter. Then, the king's voice cut through the hall again. "By the authority of this realm, I bind you as my mate." The hall erupted in shocked gasps. Nobles covered their mouths. Whispers turned into murmurs, and Lyra's knees nearly gave way. She stared at the king, stunned, unable to believe what she had just heard. He extended his hand, offering her the choice, the chance, the courage she had longed for. Lyra hesitated for a heartbeat, then, with a deep breath, placed her hand in. Isn't just like that, the ceremony, the whispers, the judgment. They all faded behind her. A new chapter had begun. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt that being marked, being different, was not something to hide, but something to embrace. The hall was still buzzing with whispers, but Lyra hardly heard them anymore. The Alpha. King's hand in hers was steady, warm, and unyielding, a stark contrast to the cold, judging stares that had followed her all her life. For the first time, she felt as though she was not just seen, but chosen. "Come," the king said, his voice calm but commanding. He led her out of the glittering hall, down long corridors lined with tapestries that told stories of past rulers. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. This was the palace, the heart of power. And yet, with each step, she felt something she had never known before. Safety. They reached a private chamber. The room was spacious with tall windows that let in the afternoon sun and a simple, elegant bed in the center. Shelves lined with scrolls and books suggested a place of learning as well as comfort. The king gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, hesitant. "You must be tired," he said softly. "It has been a long day." Lyra nodded, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her with patience or kindness. Usually people either feared the mark or used it to mock her, and yet here was the Alpha King treating her as an equal, or perhaps even more than that. Why me?" she finally asked, her voice small. "I am cursed, or at least that's what everyone says." The king shook his head. "Cursed? No. You are marked, yes. But a mark is not a curse. It is a sign of potential. Most cannot see it. Most cannot understand it. But I can." Lyra swallowed hard. Her mind raced. For years she had been alone, misunderstood, ridiculed. And now, here was a man, a king no less, telling her that she was more than what everyone else thought. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? Why choose someone who has only caused trouble?" The king stepped closer, his expression gentle but firm. "Potential is not about trouble or ease. It is about what one can do, what one can become. And you have the strength to become something great." Lyra's eyes widened. Strength? She had always thought of herself as weak. The mark had made her feel different, fragile and unwanted. Yet here was someone, the most powerful person in the realm, telling her that difference could be a strength. Over the next few days, the king began to show her small ways in which she could control her abilities. The mark on her wrist pulsed faintly, and he guided her hand, showing her how to channel the energy within it. At first she struggled. Sparks of light flickered at the tips of her fingers, uncontrolled and wild. But the king remained patient. "You must trust yourself," he said. "Fear will weaken you. Confidence will allow your power to grow." Lyra nodded, taking deep breaths as she tried again. This time, a small, steady glow emanated from her hand. It was not perfect, but it was hers. A small smile crept across her face, the first real one in many months. "You see," the king said, his eyes warm. "You are learning. You are growing. And that is what matters." Despite her progress, Lyra could not ignore the tension outside the palace walls. The nobles whispered constantly, casting sideways glances, questioning the king's choice. Some plotted in secret, fearful of her abilities and the influence she might gain as his mate. Lyra sensed the weight of their judgment, but the king's presence reminded her that she was no longer alone. One evening, the king brought her to the palace gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The garden was alive with the soft hum of nature, flowers that glowed faintly, trees that seemed to. The palace walls were silent that morning, yet tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Lyra moved through the halls, her steps careful, her heart alert. Though the Alpha King had shown her trust and kindness, the whispers outside the palace gates had grown louder. Some nobles had begun plotting in secret, fearful of what her mark might mean for the realm. Others merely watched, curious or suspicious, waiting for her to falter. Lyra had come to understand that the mark on her wrist was not just a symbol, it was a responsibility. Each pulse of silver-blue energy reminded her that she carried potential, unlike any other Omega in the realm. And though the king had guided her, she knew she could not rely solely on him. She had to learn to control her abilities, and quickly. The king entered the training chamber where she waited, his expression calm but serious. "Today," he said, "you will test your limits. You must understand not only your strength, but your mind. Fear is your greatest enemy." Lyra nodded. The chamber was large, circular, and lined with glowing symbols on the floor, symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. She could feel the energy in the room, responding to her presence. It was unnerving yet thrilling. "Focus," the king instructed. "Channel the energy in your mark. Feel it. Do not resist it. Let it flow through you, not against you." Lyra closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Memories of years spent hiding, of whispers calling her cursed, rose unbidden in her mind. She pushed them aside. She was no longer the frightened girl in the shadows. She was Lyra, marked but strong, and she had the king's belief to guide her. Slowly, she extended her hand. A faint glow appeared at her fingertips. It wavered like a candle flame in the wind, unstable and weak. The king stepped closer. "Good," he said. "Now control it. Shape it. Bend it to your will." Lyra clenched her fist, focusing. The light expanded, forming a small sphere hovering above her palm. She gasped at the beauty of it, a delicate orb of energy dancing in the air. But as she tried to hold it steady, it flickered wildly, threatening to collapse. "Breathe," the king reminded her. "Do not fight it. Become one with it." Her heartbeat slowed, and she let go of her panic. Gradually, the sphere stabilized, floating steadily above her hand. For the first time, Lyra felt mastery over the mark, however small. "Excellent," the king said, a rare smile on his face. "You are learning faster than I expected. But remember, control is only part of the journey. Understanding comes next." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber doors opened and a messenger arrived, breathless. "Your Majesty," There are disturbances at the outer gates. A group of nobles seeks to confront the Omega. Lyra's heart skipped. The rumors had turned into action. Her first test outside the palace was about to begin, and it was no longer a controlled exercise. The king placed a hand on her shoulder. "Fear nothing. I will be beside you, and you will show them what it means to underestimate strength." They moved swiftly through the palace, the corridors narrowing as tension mounted. When they reached the gates, a small crowd had gathered, nobles, who had once sneered from the shadows, now emboldened by numbers. They stepped forward, their voices sharp. "Your Majesty," one noble called out. "How can you honor someone cursed with that mark? She is dangerous." Lyra stepped forward, holding her head high. Her pulse quickened, but she drew upon the calm she had learned with the king. A soft glow began to emanate from her mark, subtle yet unmistakable. "I am not cursed," she said, her voice steady. "I am marked, and I will not harm anyone who does not threaten me or my realm." Gasps echoed through the crowd. The king's gaze met hers, proud and unwavering. One of the nobles, a tall man with a sharp jaw, sneered. "A gift? You call it a gift? Show us then. Prove it." Lyra inhaled deeply. She had been preparing for this moment, even if she had not known it. She raised her hand, and the sphere of energy that had hovered in the training chamber appeared. Above her palm, it pulsed gently, illuminating her determined face. "This mark is not for destruction," she said. "It is for protection, for guidance, for understanding. It is part of me, and I will use it to defend this realm, not to harm those who fear what they do not know." The nobles recoiled slightly, unsure whether to advance or retreat. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Even the guards seemed hesitant, caught between tradition and the king's authority. The king stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. "She speaks the truth. The Omega is under my protection. Any who attempt to harm her will face consequences. Remember, strength is not only measured by the sword but by courage, wisdom, and loyalty." For a moment silence reigned. The nobles hesitated, their fear and respect battling within them. Finally, one by one, they backed away, leaving the gates clear. Some cast lingering glances, others whispered in disbelief, but all understood that Lyra was no longer someone to underestimate. When the crowd dispersed, the king turned to her. "You see," he said, "they judge only what they do not understand. Your strength comes not from hiding, but from standing firm." Lyra nodded, her chest swelling with a mixture of relief and pride. For the first time, she realized that her mark was not a burden. It was a bridge between who she had been and who she could become. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." The king smiled gently. "Belief is easy when the proof stands before you." Later that evening, Lyra returned to the training chamber alone for the first time. The glowing symbols on the floor reflected in her eyes as she practiced, refining control over her energy. She was tired, yes, but exhilarated. Each movement, each spark of light, each pulse of her mark reminded her that she was more than whispers and fear. She was powerful, capable, and most importantly, believed in. As night fell over the palace, Lyra looked out the tall windows toward the horizon. The world beyond was vast, full of challenges and mysteries she could not yet imagine. And though shadows of doubt and envy lingered, she felt ready to face them. The Alpha King had chosen her. He had seen what others could not, and with his guidance and her own courage, Lyra would discover just how extraordinary her mark could make her. For the first time in her life, she did not feel cursed. She felt alive. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the palace, casting golden stripes across the polished floors. Lyra stood at the edge of the training courtyard, her palms slightly trembling. Today was not a day of quiet practice. Today she would face the first of the trials designed to prove her strength and worth, not only to the king, but to the skeptical nobles of the realm. The courtyard was filled with a series of obstacles, suspended beams, walls with shifting platforms, and glowing symbols that pulsed unpredictably. These trials were meant to test agility, strategy, and control over her mark. For many, they were nearly impossible. For Lyra, they were a challenge she could not refuse. The Alpha King approached, his expression calm but attentive. "Remember," he said, "the trials are not just about physical skill. They are about understanding yourself, your power, and the world around you. Do not rush. Think." Lyra nodded, inhaling deeply. She could feel the energy in her mark, warm and steady. Each pulse reminded her of the king's words: courage, confidence, and control. She stepped onto the first beam. It wavered slightly, but she kept her balance. Her mark glowed softly, helping her sense the instability beneath her feet. As she advanced, the obstacles grew more difficult. Platforms shifted unexpectedly, and symbols on the walls emitted bursts of energy when touched. She focused, channeling her mark to steady the vibrations, her body moving with a rhythm that surprised even her. "Good," the king's voice called out from the edge of the courtyard. "Use your awareness. Anticipate. Do not react blindly." Lyra reached a section with suspended ropes swinging gently in the wind. Many past Omegas had stumbled here, falling to the soft sand below. She hesitated, heart racing. Then she remembered the king's guidance: confidence, not fear. With a deep breath, she leapt, her hands gripping the first rope firmly. Her mark flared faintly as if giving her strength. She swung forward, landing lightly on the next rope. A murmur arose from the small audience of palace guards and attendants. Some had doubted her, but now they watched in awe as she moved with balance and grace. The final obstacle loomed ahead, a high platform with shifting, glowing symbols. One misstep could trigger a trap, sending her tumbling. Lyra focused, sensing the energy patterns. She extended her hand and her mark pulsed brightly, illuminating the symbols. They glowed steadily, responding to her presence. Slowly, carefully, she stepped forward, each motion deliberate, each breath measured. She reached the top. For a heartbeat, she stood there, chest heaving, exhilarated. She had completed the trial. The courtyard erupted in quiet applause, some out of admiration, some out of surprise. The king stepped forward, smiling. "Well done. You have not only completed the trial, but shown control and presence of mind. These qualities are what make a true mate for an alpha, and a true leader in this realm." Lyra bowed her head, overwhelmed by a mix of pride and relief. For so long she had felt alone, unwanted, cursed. Now she felt recognized, respected, and capable. But triumph was never permanent. No sooner had she caught her breath than a palace messenger arrived, carrying urgent news. "Your Majesty, there are reports of unrest in the neighboring provinces. Factions who oppose the Alpha are gathering, and they seek to exploit the Omega's presence as a weakness." The king's E. The morning air was sharp and still, carrying the distant sounds of the city awakening. Lyra stood atop the palace balcony, her eyes scanning the horizon. Smoke rose faintly from the outskirts of the neighboring provinces. Reports had come in. Overnight, factions opposed to the Alpha King had gathered, plotting to challenge his authority, and the presence of the marked Omega had become their excuse. The Alpha King appeared at her side, his expression calm yet resolute. "They seek to test us," he said, "but we will not falter. Today you will see that your mark is not just a symbol. It is a shield for this realm." Lyra swallowed hard. She could feel the energy in her mark pulsing stronger than ever, a quiet rhythm that matched her heartbeat. All her training, all the lessons in control had led to this moment. She had grown confident in her abilities, but she had never faced real danger beyond the controlled trials of the palace. The first signs of the attack arrived as small groups of armored figures advanced toward the city gates. Though their numbers were limited, their intent was clear. They sought chaos to sow fear and challenge the king's rule. Lyra's heart raced, but the king placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay focused," he instructed. "Use your mind as much as your power. They will underestimate you, and that is our advantage." Lyra nodded. She stepped forward, her mark glowing faintly, sending out pulses that tingled in the air. The attackers faltered for a moment, sensing the strange energy emanating from her. That hesitation gave the palace guards an opportunity to position themselves strategically. As the first wave approached, Lyra focused. She extended her hand, and a protective barrier of shimmering energy formed around the palace gate. It was not a wall to crush or harm, but a force that deflected weapons and slowed intruders. The attackers shouted in confusion, finding their arrows bouncing harmlessly off the invisible shield. "You see?" the king said quietly. "Strength is not always about attack. Sometimes it is about protection." Lyra's confidence grew with each moment. She refined her control, shifting the energy to guide the intruders away from civilians and toward neutral ground where they could be captured safely. Her mark pulsed in rhythm with her thoughts, a steady beacon of power and purpose. The battle continued for hours. Factions that had once sought to intimidate her now realized they were facing an opponent they had underestimated. Lyra moved gracefully through the courtyard, directing energy and assisting the guards. Each pulse of her mark was precise, controlled, and effective. In the midst of the chaos, a young soldier stumbled, surrounded by hostile forces. Without hesitation, Lyra extended a surge of energy, creating a protective sphere around him. The attackers were pushed back, giving the soldier a chance to regroup. He looked at her with gratitude and awe, words failing him. The Alpha King observed quietly, a proud smile on his face. "You have exceeded even my expectations," he said. "Your courage, wisdom, and control are remarkable." Lyra felt a warmth. In her chest, a mix of pride and determination. She realized that her mark was more than a gift, it was a responsibility. It could save lives, protect the innocent, and uphold the honor of the realm. As the sun reached its peak, the main force of attackers began to retreat. Their strategy had failed, their confidence shattered by the unity and skill of the king, his guards, and the Omega, whose mark had turned the tide. Lyra stood at the palace balcony, watching them vanish beyond the horizon, her chest heaving with relief and satisfaction. But the king knew the threat was not over. "This was only the beginning," he said. "There will always be those who seek to exploit fear and misunderstanding. But today, you have proven that courage and skill are stronger than prejudice." Lyra nodded. She understood now that her journey was far from over. Her mark was powerful, yes, but her greatest strength lay in her mind, her courage, and her ability to inspire those around her. She had turned whispers of curse into admiration and respect. That evening, as the palace settled into quiet calm, Lyra and the king walked through the gardens. The glow of lanterns reflected off the flowers, creating a serene and peaceful atmosphere. "You have done more than defend the palace," the king said. "You have changed minds. You have shown that strength and difference can coexist, that what is feared may also be revered." Lyra smiled softly. "I never thought I could be this," she admitted. "I used to feel so small, so useless. Now," her voice faltered, overwhelmed by the weight of her own growth. "Now you know your potential," the king finished for her, "and the realm will know it too. But remember, power alone is not enough. Compassion, strategy, and understanding will guide you further than strength ever could." Lyra looked at him, realizing the truth in his words. Her mark had brought her here, but it was her courage, her learning, and her trust in the king that had allowed her to triumph. She felt a deep sense of belonging, not just as the king's mate, but as someone who could influence the future of the realm. Later that night, she sat by the window of her chamber, gazing at the stars above. The city was quiet, yet she knew that challenges would return. Factions that opposed the king would regroup. Rumors and fear would continue to spread. But she no longer feared them. She had faced them, guided by her mark and her own determination, and emerged stronger. The Alpha King appeared at the doorway, silent and calm. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow we continue. There is always more to learn, more to protect, and more to accomplish." Lyra nodded, a quiet determination settling in her heart. She had grown, yes, but she knew the path ahead would demand even more. Yet for the first time, she was ready, not only to face challenges but to embrace them. With her mark glowing softly, she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that her courage and wisdom had made a difference. She had defended the realm, inspired respect, and proven that being different was not a curse. It was a gift. And as she drifted into sleep, the Alpha King's presence nearby reminded her that she would never face the future alone. Together they would meet every trial, overcome every threat, and build a realm where courage, strength, and understanding were celebrated, no matter who bore the mark. The morning sun bathed the palace in warm light, golden and hopeful. Lyra stood on the balcony, her mark glowing faintly on her wrist, a gentle reminder of how far she had come. The city below was alive with movement, merchants opening their shops, children running through the streets, and citizens greeting one another with cautious but genuine smiles. Life had returned to a sense of normalcy, but Lyra knew that the calm was not mere luck. It was the result of courage, wisdom, and the unity she had helped foster. The Alpha King appeared at her side, his cloak fluttering lightly in the breeze. "The realm looks peaceful today," he said, his voice calm yet carrying authority. "But peace is not given. It is earned through action, understanding, and respect. And you, Lyra, have contributed more than anyone could have imagined." Lyra turned to him, a smile lifting her features. "I never imagined I could do so much. I thought the mark made me a curse. I feared every step, every glance. But now," she paused, looking at the bustling city below. "I see that being different. It can be a strength." The king nodded. "It always was. Courage comes not from conforming, but from embracing who you are and guiding others with that truth." Over the past weeks, Lyra had grown into her role, not just as the king's mate, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. Nobles who once whispered against her now came to seek her advice. Citizens who had avoided her were now inspired by her courage. Even young Omegas looked to her as an example, learning that difference and strength could coexist. The final test had not been in the palace trials or the controlled exercises. It had been in defending the realm itself, standing firm against those who sought to exploit fear. Lyra had done more than survive. She had led, protected, and earned respect. A delegation of nobles approached, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty," one began, "and Lyra, your guidance and courage have preserved the stability of the realm. We seek to recognize your efforts and follow the example you have set." Lyra's mark pulsed softly, responding not with power, but with pride. She had worked to gain acceptance, not for herself alone, but for all who had been judged or misunderstood. Now, the society she had once feared was beginning to understand. The king placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity and pride. "Do not let this moment change who you are," he advised. "Use it wisely with humility, compassion, and courage." Lyra nodded. She understood that her journey was not finished, but she also knew that she had found her place. She was no longer the girl feared and shunned. She was a leader, a protector, and a mate to the Alpha King, not because of privilege but because of her strength and character. As the day progressed, a celebration was held in the palace courtyard. Lanterns hung from delicate arches, and the citizens of the realm gathered, offering smiles, gifts, and words of respect. Lyra walked among them, her mark glowing faintly, not as a warning, but as a symbol of hope and courage. Children reached out to her, their eyes wide with admiration, and she knelt to greet them, sharing gentle words and guidance. The king joined her at the center of the courtyard, his presence calm but commanding. Together, they addressed the gathered crowd. "Strength is not always in the sword," he said, his gaze sweeping across the faces of nobles and citizens alike. "It is in